I'm just get worked the up talking about this shit because it pisses me the off. Whew, let me calm down. We're going to do twice as much in half the time with less people. This was on a big slide when I joined this company presented by the team. At this moment, I knew I immediately up. What followed was one of the most frustrating, demoralizing, and honestly, one of the most educational experiences of my career thus far. I watched a team get ground down by the idea that AI tools meant you could just skip thinking and that speed was the only metric that mattered, and that vibe coding, just prompting your way to a product, was a legitimate engineering strategy. Plot twist. It was not. And I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, what it looked like from the inside, and why I eventually left. But I also want to tell you about the team I joined next that includes some top-notch engineers who are coding with AI and doing it in a completely different way that actually works so far. Because the lesson here isn't that AI is bad, AI bad, coding with hand good. That's a simplified, stupid view that doesn't make any sense. The lesson here is actually that people making the decisions about how you use AI matter more than the tools themselves. Let me explain. So let me set the stage for you. I joined this fast-paced AI startup early 2025. This was around the time when you might use Cursor or Claude, but you probably didn't want to let people know. Agentic coding was fairly new. The CEOs of this team were very non-technical people, super smart, understood the business domain really, really well, had zero software engineering background. Just to set the scene for you here. Right out of the gate, they proudly declared, "We are an AI-first company. Everybody is going to use any and all tools to do everything much faster." Then the beautiful slide. Twice as much, half the time, less people. You're all fired. This is like my first week there. I'm like, oh my God, this is nuts. Now, I want to be fair, even though it's really easy to bash these people, but I get it in some ways, right? If you are running a startup and you're reading these ridiculous LinkedIn posts, you're listening to the same consultants that have these big microphones, and you're hearing about how all the tools just make everything easy to do. AI writes the code. Humans just steer the AI. You can cut headcount and double the output simultaneously. What's not to love as a greedy CEO? But here's what AI first actually means at this type of company. Here's an idea, now vibe code it. Don't care about tech debt. Get something out as fast as humanly possible. No guidelines, fuck the architecture, fuck discussions, fuck the design docs, no specs, literally. Literally, there was no code base at this time. There was not even a GitHub repo, nothing. Just an idea, here's your deadline, fuck you. We were doing up to 2 demos a week, starting from scratch each time. There was no real data, so we had to fake data that looked cool. The goal was never really a working product, honestly. It was a working demo, something that stakeholders could click around on, and we'd deploy this to this actual environment that looked impressive enough to keep the money flowing. You could have just done this with Figma, right? But why do that when you could just vibe code everything? And to be completely fair, this kind of worked. We got demos out. The demos evolved into almost a product. But almost product is the most dangerous place to be because now you've got something that looks real, but it's built on a foundation of absolute and utter garbage. Here's what actually happens when speed is the only metric and everything else must, by nature, suffer for the speed. I was writing code in languages I didn't fully know. I'm still doing that as well, right? But I wasn't learning on the job. I wasn't learning anything about the syntax or the code base or the code that the next person wrote. AI was writing all the code. I was shipping it without deeply understanding what it was doing, not even shallowly understanding what I was doing. There was no time. The deadline was 2 days from now, and the demo had to work. We ended up with this 1,000-line long React file. Maybe it was like 3,000. It was massive. It was too freaking big. There were multiple use effects. And you might be thinking, well, just break it into smaller components, you idiot. We tried. I tried. It didn't work. There was so much code, so tightly coupled, that decomposing it became a bigger project than building it in the first place. It was a house of cards. One change had unforeseen consequences everywhere. And here's the thing that I hate that people say, well, just throw more agents at it. Can't Cursor or Claude just refactor it? Maybe, probably even with today's tools, but that misses the entire point. It's our code. We own the code. When it breaks, and it did break, you have to debug it. When the demo crashes in front of stakeholders, you can't say, hold on, let me ask Claude what went wrong with this and have it decompose this and then make more of a mess because nobody understands it. You have to understand at some level the system that you're working within. And we didn't understand the system. We never took the time to think about the actual system. We just prompted our way into a pile of files and essentially hoped for the best. But it looked pretty cool. One of the worst issues, and this one is really burned into my memory, was a developer who had literal gigabytes of images and assets that looked great locally on their really fast MacBook. A beautiful demo. Super cool videos, all these images, and then we tried to push this to GitHub. For the first time that I've ever seen, GitHub said, no, we can't host this much stuff. Neither would Vercel. I've quite literally never seen this. It said, you got too much stuff. We can't host this stuff. You must offload this somewhere else. S3, maybe Cautionary, wherever can host static assets that is not just GitHub. So now I had to stop everything I was doing and set up the infrastructure, get the approvals for the payment for this kind of thing, set up the script to actually push all those files into this storage system, and then wire up our front end so it would use that instead of the local paths for those particular files. Now, this took me about half a day, right? Could have been caught within minutes if somebody had been paying attention to what we were doing instead of just racing to the next demo. It was like, here's the code I have, here is a zip file, you figure it out. That's the tax. Vibe coding doesn't eliminate work. It just moves work around. You skip the thinking up front and then you pay for it 10 times more on the back end. Fire drills, migrations, debugging sessions where you're looking at code and you're like, who the wrote this code? It's written by a model that doesn't remember writing it and has no clue what is good or bad. All you said was make the thing. Now, all of that, the tech debt, the house of cards architecture, the impossible deadlines, that's frustrating, but it's manageable, I guess, if you have leadership that listens when you kind of explain trade-offs and stuff. We didn't really have that. What truly made this not a great place was the technical CEOs giving us a lot of technical advice. And I want to be careful here because I'm not saying non-technical leaders can't run engineering teams. Also, just to cover my ass, maybe this is all made up. I don't know. Maybe this is just a story I heard from one of you out there. Who knows? Certainly not me. But basically, I don't want to gatekeep. Anybody can have an opinion. I mean, opinions are always welcome. But what you shouldn't do, or what you really can't do, what nobody should do, is tell a team of engineers how to build something when they've never built anything on their own. This is what it kind of looked like. So I've heard, allegedly. CEOs ask ChatGPT something. Type in some question about cloud infrastructure, data processing, get back a generic document that has a completely different architecture. They made assumptions about our stack that just weren't true, that made no sense. And then they bring it to the engineering team like, hey, you idiots, I found the solution. Look how simple that was. And now we're spending 30 minutes or half the day explaining why this AI-generated architecture doesn't apply to our specific problem. This does not save time. In fact, this creates more work because now that everybody feels empowered to have technical opinions because ChatGPT gave them a confident sounding answer, you start fielding questions that you never even thought you'd have to answer before. Like, why do we need a database in the cloud? Why don't we just train our own model? What are all these services? Just shut them down. Why are we paying for this provider? What is this provider? This may sound silly, but imagine me going into a marketing team and saying, hey, what's this pixel that you're putting on people's pages? Or, hey, what is HubSpot? Why are you using HubSpot? Just send 300 emails directly from your Gmail. That'd be a way more personal way to do that. Or let's say I go to the legal team and start telling the lawyers how to draft contracts because I saw how Claude could do it. Oh, we're spending way too much time on these documents. They're all kind of the same. Here's a template. Just use that. Plug and play. You'd look at me like I lost my fucking mind because that's exactly what was happening in the other direction. And the worst part, I felt kind of bad for him, or allegedly I did. I genuinely did, because we're all being told collectively by social media, by consultants who can't code their way out of a paper bag, that this is how it's supposed to work. These consultants come in and say, hey, your team just isn't doing this thing right. You can move so much faster. You just need this one thing that I happen to know. That one thing doesn't exist. It never existed. And these consultants, for the most part, are selling snake oil to non-technical founders who are desperate to believe it and then share it with their investors, how they are slashing costs by accelerating their quarterly goals, right? What a beautiful story. We fired half the team and we're actually more efficient. And then CEOs set deadlines based on fantasy. engineering teams crash into reality, and every time people say, hey, we need to slow down to speed up, it's treated like you're an old Luddite, old school nonsense, something a real AI engineer would never say. This kind of stuff drives me fucking insane, and then I ultimately left, or allegedly I did. I'm just get worked the up talking about this shit because it pisses me the off. Whew, let me calm down. So, now, calm down, Brian. Now I went to a much bigger company, allegedly. Really smart people, some of whom I'd actually worked with before. Some people from Amazon, people with decades of experience, engineers who built compliance systems for government agencies, Fortune 500 companies, big, boring systems that shape the world, right? Processing payments, the stuff that people pay for, handling sensitive data, stuff that you generally just don't think about when you think about vibe coding. And here's the thing that surprised me and maybe will surprise you. Most of the people on my team are writing 100% of their code with AI. Claude, mostly, Cursor, some people. We're using these tools heavily, maybe even more so than I was at the startup. The main difference, however, is everything that happens before and after the prompting. We think deeply about problems before we touch the code. We write documents. We discuss them with our brains. We're very clear about what needs to be done, how it should be done, the pitfalls, the pros, and the cons. I've lately done more writing than reading, and this might sound slow to the vibe coding crowd, but it's also the reason why we can deploy multiple times per day with a lot of confidence. We're writing way more tests than ever before. And the tests aren't ceremonial, and I don't want to get in this whole thing like, oh, we have to do these ceremonies because that's how good code is made. We got to write code to make money, right? We write the tests so we can move faster. They document expected behavior. They catch regressions before users do. They let us refactor aggressively without freaking out and manually test a bunch of scenarios. And now that AI has made writing these tests trivial, we don't really have an excuse not to have pretty good coverage. Good tests are still hard to write because they're hard to think through the scenarios that you need to test. But even like decent tests are better than nothing, and most teams barely have that. So we spend a lot more time on code reviews, not less, more time. AI writes most of the code. The reviewers where human judgment happens. I've had a lot of bugs get caught like this in languages I don't necessarily understand. And then you catch these subtle bugs, the kind of stuff that you just won't catch like in a CI/CD pipeline where you're looking at like static code analysis. You can catch things that are more like, hey, why did you make this choice? Maybe we should do this. And now you can make much larger asks of the person. You can say, hey, you know what? Maybe just do this in a completely different way because it's better. And even though it would take you hours to do by hand, you can basically have Claude do it for you in minutes. So now the cost is much lower to fix these things rather than saying, hey, you spent all this time doing this thing. Let's just kind of keep it as is, right? But here's the big thing I've noticed between these two teams. On this team, the engineers are building their own tools. We have shared skills files, MCP servers that search over Confluence docs, Jira tickets, architecture decision records. We have tools to give Claude specific context about our code base, conventions, and patterns. The tools are built by engineers for engineers within the company. They're not handed down from somebody in technical leadership or imported from some consultant's generic playbook. This is what it looks like when engineers drive AI adoption inside of the organization instead of having it kind of just imposed on them. The results are pretty cool. I was able to set up a Kubernetes cluster with Terraform scripts, and I don't know shit about Kubernetes. Not really, right? This would have taken me days, maybe weeks to learn the traditional way. I don't really know Kubernetes, by the way, but it helped me get over a hurdle that it took to launch a piece of our infrastructure. It gave me just enough context, or it gave Claude just enough context, I should say, to get it done. Not vibe coding some random junk, but like guardrails, engineering judgment, and knowing that the AI's output was okay, and then having a human in the loop to review it and say, hey, Brian, actually, this makes no sense. Why'd you write this here? Why don't you do this? What is this thing? Why'd you give this permission to this S3 bucket, whatever? All the things I normally just wouldn't know. But here's what I hope you take away from this, because I know a lot of you are probably going through some version of what I went through right now, and it sucks, right? The problem has never been AI, or I don't know, maybe it is, right? AI is powerful. I'm not here to make some sort of case for or against it. The tools are cool, whatever, right? The problem though, who's making the decisions about how it gets used? When non-engineers, CEOs, consultants, LinkedIn influencers, and by the way, there are some great consultants out there. I don't mean to dunk or harass you, amazing consultants, but some of you guys take a long walk off a short bridge, right? This whole get twice as much done with half the people and fire your team and all this kind of nonsense. This is morally bad, and technically stupid, right? You get tech debt that compounds really, really quick. It's like a credit card to just swipe to get as much tech debt as you can possibly handle and then ship out something terrible to customers who are paying for it. And for what? So you can say, hey, we got you this really awful product incrementally faster. But I do genuinely think that if you're a team that uses AI for 100% of your code, that's cool. If you're using it for 0% of your code, I think that's also cool, right? If you can build and maintain what you ship, that should be the most important metric, not speed. Stuff that works, that's stable, and you can iterate on, that's not going to crash when a paying customer uses it, that's what you should aim for. Speed is a byproduct of doing the right things. It's not the ultimate goal. And I'm distinctly saying this exactly. I said, you know what? We need to slow down to speed up. I really wanted this company to work. Great people, well-intentioned, but you know what they say? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Anyway, slow down the planning, speed up the execution, think deeply so you can code quickly, write docs so you don't waste tokens, and build tools so your AI has context. There's more than enough videos out there to show you how to do that. And let's be honest, customers deserve working products. Let me get on my really high horse real quick and tell you, it doesn't matter if it's for an enterprise app that you're building for or a free tool for 10 users. It should work. And you can't make something that works if the only thing you care about is how fast you made it, and your customers truly don't care about that either. So if you're in vibe coding hell, I get it. I feel for your brother or sister. And honestly, there might not be a lot you can do about it if the leadership is driving the bus off the cliff, right? But you can fight back with common sense. You can at least try to fight the good fight. You can be the person who says, hey, let's write down a one-page doc before we start prompting. Let's think a little bit about what we're building here. You know, a day of planning can save a week of coding. You can be the person who pushes for shared tools and standards. And by the way, if you want to learn how to build AI systems the right way with real architecture, real testing, real production concerns, check out parsity.io/AI. Every Wednesday, I do a live session, which is really cool. I met some really cool people last time. We had a great time talking about RAG architecture, agents, and generally how we're all feeling about the state of AI right now. And there's also free resources in the show notes that'll teach you more than most people learn in months of vibe coding. I always hope that's helpful, and I'll see you around. And I promise to cuss a little bit less next time. I apologize if your delicate ears were offended. See you around.